evening. My name is Christie Max Williams, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the April edition of this, the 24th year of the Arts Café Mystic. Thank you. April is Poetry Month, and we are delighted to have you join us for what we think will be a wonderfully celebratory evening of poetry and music, headlined by the great Philip Schultz. Of course, as I've told some of you before, by no means is poetry, or does poetry have an exclusive franchise on the month of April. For example, you might be interested to know that April is also National Peanut Butter and Jelly Month, National Sense of Smell Month, National Jelly Bean Month, and National Walk on the Wild Side Month. So get in step. It's also National Parental Alienation Awareness Month, National Math and Science Awareness Month, and International Noise Awareness Month. So consider yourself made aware. And for you internationalists, April is also International Pink Month. It's true. Can't make this stuff up. It's also World Tai Chi Month, International Siblings Month, and International Denim Observance Month. I could go on. Yes, I know you're thinking I've already gone on. But during this National Honesty Month, it's true, and couldn't we all use a little more honesty in our lives, if not from each other, at least from our government? I'm bound to report to you that all of this foolishness may not matter a damn, because according to several recent news reports, apocalyptic theorists, imagine having that on your business card. According to new apocalyptical theory, the end of the world is fast approaching. Yes, on April 23rd, that's Monday if you're keeping track. Yes, on Monday, take notes here. On Monday, the sun, the moon, and Jupiter will come into an extraordinary alignment in the constellation of Virgo. Virgo as in the Blessed Virgin, which will bring on the start of the biblical rapture, according to these reports. There it is. You heard it first at the Arts Café. and on that Monday night, again, April 23rd, it's said that the mysterious planet Nibiru will appear in the sky, followed by the onset of World War III, the rise of the Antichrist, and 7 years of tribulation. So make your plans. For those of you new to the Arts Café, if you're wondering what's happening to you, we are an independent nonprofit, and our mission is to present the nation's most celebrated poets and writers, along with New England's finest musicians, in programs that lift your spirits as we deepen your mind. And if we have a little fun along the way, so much the better. Our opening voice tonight is the poet Eleanor Kedney, who calls both Stonington and Tucson home, which doubly proves that we all have to be from somewhere. Ms. Kedney is the author of a fine chapbook called The Offering, and a book-length manuscript called 12 Days from Transfer, which was a finalist for the Press 53 Award and is awaiting publication. Her poems have appeared in several anthologies and in such distinguished venues as the New York Quarterly, Connecticut River Review, and Miramar Poetry Journal. For a decade, she was director of the Writers Studio Tucson, a branch of the New York-based creative writing school founded by Philip Schultz. Some of Ms. Kedney's best poems report poignantly on grown-up love, love that shines in the shadow of loss and yearning. She also writes strong poems of place set in the mountains and arroyos surrounding Tucson, redolent with the exotic sights, sounds, and scents of the high desert. As the poet puts it herself, for the first time, I let myself love a place. There's much more I could say about Ms. Kedney's poems, but I'm eager for you to hear for yourself. So won't you please join me in welcoming Eleanor Kedney.
It's true. I live in both Stonington and Tucson, and I consider the Arts Café one of the many treasures. And I appreciate all the people who came out tonight for both poetry and music. I also want to thank Christie for inviting me back to read at the Arts Café Mystic. And I want to say that this is a very special night for me because Phil has been a mentor, he's been an inspiration, and he's been a friend. And I'm as excited as all of you to hear his new poems. So it's quite special. I'm going to be reading a few poems from my book, The Offering, and a couple of new poems. I'd like you to all be a part of that, of the new work as well. The first poem I'm going to read is called Desert Millipedes. And when I approach grief or any strong emotion, I like to work with some techniques. And what I do with this poem is I start with the millipede and I end with the millipede. But I also use something called anaphora, where I repeat a word, and the word is about. And that's something that has been a calling back, or it means a calling up. And it's something that was used a lot in devotional poetry and religious poetry and litanies. Desert Millipede. After a monsoon, I lift a millipede on a stick, watch it coil, expose only its armored side. For 20 years, I've tried to grieve for my brother. After his death, I tried to write a poem about running into an old friend of his, off drugs and doing well, about a young man in New York City, well-dressed in a tweed coat with wavy brown hair, collapsed in a pharmacy doorway, seeing my brother's face in his and not being able to look away. About my brother's first day home from prison and how he stood boastful in the shabby light of our parents' living room. About my brother as a boy who couldn't play with toys without breaking them. About the phone calls that kept coming for him, and I couldn't admit he died from an overdose and lied. I put the millipede down and it uncurls, even though vulnerable in the light. It moves in a wave, some legs always touching the ground. This next poem is called Reading Frank O'Hara After My Mother's Death. And after she died, I felt as though my world had changed, but everybody else's world just kept going on. And it was very hard to get back into writing and going to classes or work. And somebody gave me a book of Frank O'Hara's poems. And I really loved how he made the everyday thing in his poems and his sensitive reaction to it the subject of his poems. So it was very helpful for me to look at that and be able to get back into writing by looking at his work and being inspired by it. Reading Frank O'Hara After My Mother's Death. I buy an Arizona Daily Star to read obituaries in which everyone was kind, generous, and will be missed. The advice given from a heart doctor: don't look at the stat monitors. You can't live by the numbers. There were days hers were so good. This month, a blue moon on New Year's Eve. The maid at the Waldorf, a Russian Jew, told me, "Get out and walk. Don't look at anybody. Don't go into stores, just walk." In St. Bartholomew's Church, a woman turned to a man, "God wants you to live as long as possible." I just wanted quiet, the kind of quiet that comes out of stillness, hummingbird wings sculling the air, Ave Maria sung as liturgy by an opera singer. I took a wrong turn today up the mountain. Now I wear blue topaz, the color of my mother's eyes, oval stones in a bracelet, hoop earrings. Though I am not mineral or vitreous, I've been touched, turned, warmed, and cut. I want to believe that the dog lick-kisses my lips because she loves me and not for the sweet jam in the corners of my mouth. Now I count lights when I drive, snack instead of eating meals. Now the wave of a bare greasewood in the wind, the orange flowers that hang on, the Cape honeysuckle in January amaze me. This next poem is called Apple Pie, and I use an older narrator looking back, which is very, very helpful to have perspective much later in life on something. And my dad made the best apple pie in the world. So if you love apple pie, there's some good descriptions of apple pie. I found my father sifting fine white flour falling into drifts in the belly of a yellow bowl. While he turned the crank and metal moved like a scythe, scraping against mesh, he was quiet, young in natural light, his cheeks ruddy, his dark hair slick with Brill cream, combed high, the tip of his tongue on his lower lip as when he wrote Christmas cards, making extra dots above eyes, adding curly cues to the tails of G's and Y's. I wanted to know his thoughts. The Cortland apples peeled and cored while I had slept, waited on the counter dressed in cinnamon and sugar as if this was a special occasion, though we often made pie early in the morning, pie pleased and his inspired praise. He'd serve me a piece complete with swirls of whipped cream and look into my face. He was a kid that way. I didn't pretend I could someday make pie and it would taste like his, the crust flaking when it hits the tongue, the apples spicy, sweet, and buttery. But sleepily, I listened to what he wanted to tell me about measuring Crisco and chilling dough. He had no written recipe, only his ease, cutting and shortening, his wrist moving back and forth as if rocking a cradle. Big fingers handled dough like delicate fabric, easing it into a pie plate, fluting the crusts with his thumb, his mark. He set the timer, and it loudly ticked away our minutes. The morning of his wake, my mother threw away the last piece of apple pie to make room for cold cuts, salads, and sodas. I lifted it out of the garbage and ate it. This next poem, I've been writing a series of river poems. And what I'm interested in the natural phenomena of rivers, so I've been studying rivers, and I'm working with the natural phenomena of the river and then bringing in some of the personal and working with a little figurative thread to the poem. And this one is one of two of them that are coming out in a journal this summer, and it's called Riverbank. American beach, roots tangled in the understory, the bank scoured by wind and rain, eroded earth, a miracle shift, the flow still confined, broom sedge alive, a coppery glow. Our dreams as sediment turn into rock. Last night I heard, don't take Valium anymore to fall asleep. If you continue what you're doing, you won't be here. The dying say what they will miss the most is their body. How long I've judged the smallest things to be another. I inspect the damage, right the canoe, paddle alongside wood ducks, warm and dry in moving water. A split branch points upward. The sky has always been there. This next poem I'm going to read, my friend Melanie requested it. Melanie is one of my first friends in Stonington, not only connecting me to other poets in the area, but she took me to the book barn. So how lucky was that? And it's called What We Do. He tells me I will never be alone. I hold him before he leaves the bed. He holds my hand when we are lying there talking. He rubs between the shoulder blades where grief is held in my body. I give him head pets, scalp massages when he can't fall asleep, even if I'm tired. If I cook eggs, I give him the unbroken ones. He walks the dog, takes out the garbage and the recycling. Often I'll do the dishes, even if it's not my turn. He takes care of all the bills. I do the food shopping, house cleaning, launder the towels and sheets. He doesn't understand my connection to rocks, but lets me bring them into the house. I bought him his menorah, light the candles with him, and learn to make the matzo ball soup. I remind him to call his father. He loves the dog and all animals. He is with me when I cry in the middle of the night. I love him every day. I tell him he is handsome. I tell him I'll be there for him when his father dies. I get up to see him off to work, making sure he has some fruit to take with him. I show him the yellow caterpillar I hold in my palm that will turn into a hummingbird moth. He is sensitive to the sacredness of life. I read him this poem. He canceled business trips, conference calls, and left work early to be with me. I take care of him when he is well and sick. He drives me back and forth to the hospital at night when I'm exhausted. I gave him a scuba diving course as a gift, so he will be safe in the water. He is patient with my OCD, puts up with my impatience and messiness. I encourage him to sing, telling him he has a good voice. I talk through my dreams. He helped with the memorial, doing whatever I needed. I went to his doctor's appointments when his retina was torn. He stopped working out to be at the hospital or to come home and be with me. He calls every day to check in with me the way my dad did with my mom. I make snack bags for us to take on the airplane. He tries to make me laugh with silly cliches. I check in with him if he doesn't call me the way my mom did with my dad. We'll take care of each other when we are old. I root for the Patriots, go Patriots, with him and make guacamole. He gave me the best birthday card ever. We lie on the floor with the dog. We ride a bicycle built for two. He walks on the street side of the sidewalk to protect me like his grandmother taught him to do. He told my mom, as he did my dad, he would always take care of me. He'll marry me again. I only swim with him. I'm going to end with a poem. It's kind of a funny thing. I started to get an inkling that I should write about objects. And it really was an inkling, like a feeling. But I didn't pick the objects. They picked me. And the first one was a jar with a lid. And I'm like, I have to write about a jar with a lid? What do I know about a jar with a lid? So I went and got a jar with a lid and kept it on the kitchen table for about a month. And Mary Oliver always says, if you stare at something long enough, you'll feel something. So I started to write a series of these. I think I have like 12 of them now, and many of them are out there published. And this one that I'm going to read is called A Fire Hydrant on Camino de la Amapola, which is the street near where we live. And one day, coming home, and like I said, I spent about a month with these objects. I said to my husband, "Oh, there's my friend." And he said, "Where?" And I said, "The fire hydrant." And he said, "Don't tell people a fire hydrant is your friend." But I did have a disguise. I did walk the dog with me to visit the fire hydrant. So I had a little bit of a cover. And so I'm going to end with a fire hydrant. A fire hydrant on Camino de la Amapola. When we walk past it every day, it's easy to forget its virtues: patience, reliability, fortitude. Go close. You'll hear the continuous rush of a swift underground river. Yet it never moves, even on muddy days. I'd like to know that kind of stillness, emotions roiling while the body is calm. It waits to be needed, cast with the word open and an arrow faithfully guiding us which way to turn if fire were to ascend beyond one small flame, and in our disquiet, our despair, when we could lose everything dear, it gives full on what we are mostly made of. Thank you.
Eleanor Cadling, ladies and gentlemen. Eleanor invoked the poetic device anaphora. That's always seemed to me to be one of those things predictive of the apocalypse. I'm pleased to announce that we have Eleanor's fine book, The Offering, on sale tonight. As always, all proceeds go to the author. And this gives me a chance to thank our friends at Bank Square Books for their support. Mystic is lucky to have so hip and friendly and independent bookstore. I also want to thank the Mystic Art Center, that is the Mystic Museum of Art now, for welcoming the Arts Café again. Our community is fortunate to have such a cool resource, and we are grateful to be at home here. I should mention that hanging around you is the annual juried show of the Connecticut Academy of Fine Artists. That makes this collection around us the best of the best artists in Connecticut. I might add that on Thursday, May 3rd, there will be an opening reception for this exhibition to which you're all invited, and it's free. I should also mention down below is a 3-person show. One of the artists whom is here tonight, Sarah Stifler Lucas, longtime supporter. Thank you, Sarah. Check out Sarah's paintings downstairs while you're at it. So, on with the show. The Arts Café has presented just about every damn kind of music you can think of. From folk to rock to jazz, classical, even opera has happened here. Our musical interlude tonight is provided in part by Nora Fox, who, as many of you know from her past performances at the Arts Café, embodies all the musical genres I just mentioned. Nora comes to us from New York City, but many of you know her as a local girl from Stonington, who made good while performing on Broadway, at the Goodspeed Opera, Madison Square Garden, the Eugene O'Neill Center, and on tour in South America, the Mediterranean, and even Mali. Nora is joined tonight by the accomplished classical cellist Ju Lung Lee. JY, as he's known, is a product of Juilliard and Vanderbilt. He's playing an international career as soloist, chamber musician, and recording artist. He's currently touring the U.S. with the Core Ensemble. Though he's performed with the Nashville Symphony and New York Symphonia Ensemble, among others, he has also recorded on jazz, rock, and country albums. I've no idea what sort of music, genre bending or other, that they may have in store for us tonight, but it should be interesting. So won't you bring on Nora and JY with a round of applause.
When the world's asleep and you're trying to keep your sanity in the floor, the days all spin and your future's dim, something has got to give. A melody untold will brighten this lonesome road. A midnight dream unfurled. Together we will whirl through the cobbled stones of time. Let go of all your plans. I'll take you by the hand and promise that you'll be mine. When the skies are lit but your mind won't quit, and your life is but a blur, your legs won't fold and your arms grow cold, forgotten the way things were. As lonesome as you may be, just try to remember me when the night won't let you go and the waiting is getting old. Together we will run in time. Together we will run in time. But still the day is new, and I'm not done loving you. So forget the end of time and promise you'll be mine. Thank you. That's loud. All right. That was a song I wrote in 125th Street. Oh, that's hot, huh? I don't know, a few years ago now. So, and this is my dear friend JY. It's our first time we performed together. So you, as well as I, have the pleasure of being witness to this new collaboration. So he's like, we'll see after last night. I mean, after tonight. Oh boy, that wasn't a joke. All right. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be an inappropriate joke. So it meant. Without further ado, all right, we have an Audre Lorde poem, "A Woman Speaks," that
we may have done a few years ago with Ethan Philbrick. Ethan Philbrick, some of you may know, he is a wonderful scholar and cellist, and had set this poem to music.
I've been woman a long time, beware of my smile. Treacherous as magic old, and the restless oceans pound. I've been a woman a long time, beware of my smile. Treacherous as magic old, and the restless oceans pound. I seek no favor, untouched by blood, love without pity, hate without scorn, and moon marked and touched by sun, my magic is unwritten. When the sea turns its back, it'll leave my shape behind. Moon marked and touched by sun, my magic is unwritten. When the sea turns its back, it'll leave my shape behind. I do not dwell within my birth, nor my end, 'cause I am ageless and have grown, still seeking, seeking, seeking my sisters, witches, and down they wear me inside their clothes, as did our mothers. Morning, 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 I seek noon's fury, unprotected love, all the futures you promised, open and wide, and I seek noon's fury.
switch up our program for you a little bit. All right. Hold you when we dream, round and round we weave, easy if you try. Your legs wrap gently, your lips brush closer, we last till morning sky. She laughs gently, there's a place called heaven, the sky aches blue now as her mind unbends. See the twilight as the grays touch gold, there's a useless fear that the sun won't roll. Dawn's a waste and there's no more place when you feel the time is now. Fingers lapse as days collapse and you long to shape your vow. Time uncertain, there's an inward beauty, the laws unburdened and the future's purely rolling empty as the sky goes blank. I'll see you smiling at the lake, let's dance. Legs roll as the time slows and the weeds grow in the parlor. Your lights dim, no you can't win as your mind slides even farther. The clock strikes zero as the walls melt inward. The ceiling falls as the stars crash down. I see you smiling as the sky unfolds. The plaster crumbles to the ground, I'm falling. That was a Glock debut, so. Yay! All right. Okay, let's do it these days, yeah? Oh, we have faster. We have a plan, but you know, does anyone know Randy Pausch? The last lecture. Yeah, you should, if you don't know, it'd be worth checking out, but he was a professor at Carnegie Mellon who they give a faculty member an honor to, if they were to give a last lecture, what would it be? And it just so happened that he was terminally ill, so it was actually going to be his last lecture. So he spoke about how to live your life's dreams, or how to live your childhood dreams. And let's see. The next song, let's do These Days, actually. This is this is a song that's newer. Hello. And it's also just a song about the processing of my father's passing. So.
is happening. I can see it entering. I won't stop or wait again if you let them take you in. There was an orphan in your name. Now I see it's all in my fate. The images grow in my eyes, fill me how sacrifice. These days I won't wait for no one but you. And when you leave, carry me, I'll be with you. I'm losing my armor, I won't slow. He's moving me forward more than I know. Your eyes are holding me, melting all that stone in me. These days I won't wait for no one but you. When you leave, carry me, I'll be with you. Moving slowly, don't let go. You don't have to wait no more, just let them take you in. There is no end, we only begin. Now I hold you in my arms. It's almost over, nothing will harm you. I'll be your friend, I'll care for you. Just breathe and then move. Ah, then move.
Oh, it's faster. Yeah. How are we for time, Christy? Yeah? Faster, faster. All right. Have a plan, but plan to change the plan. Or just don't have a plan to be screwed. It's up to you. All right. This next song was written with a local friend, Amelia Golden, who some of you may know. So.
When I saw you, I stepped back. You walked over across the pavement. I knew what you were saying, though your words made no difference. Falling over through the waiting fast or finished. Release it to the birds you spun out in the forest. The quiet in the night, our voices wouldn't reach the chorus. Bring me back this rope on sleigh, these dragons don't leave. Walking threadbare through the mall. Take good care of your heart. Find yourself somebody new. Just be sure she's good to you. When I saw you, I stepped back. You walked all across the pavement. I knew what you were saying, all your words made no difference. Falling over through night, in the night our voices wouldn't reach the chorus. Bring me back this rope, won't slay these dragons. Don't leave.
Okay, thank you so much. We have one more. As is tradition, we like to end our nights here with a operatic tune. So we have Rusalka's Song to the Moon, Dvorak piece. And for those of you who don't speak Czech, any Czech? Czech. Oh, okay. This is Rusalka is a water sprite. Who was that? You speak Czech too? She's like, yeah, watch your language. So this is, Rusalka is looking up to the moon and asking the moon if she could call upon her lover to remember her. So.
I must say that I've been keenly anticipating this evening because our featured poet is Philip Schultz. In your program, you've read of Mr. Schultz's many honors, the Pulitzer Prize, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award, the Lamont and the Levinson Prizes, the nominations for the National Book Award, the Guggenheim, the Fulbright, the National Endowment for Arts Fellowships. A glittering resume, to be sure. Mr. Schultz is also the author of a best-selling memoir called My Dyslexia, which recounts what it feels like in the mind and heart of a boy contending with a severe learning disability. A must-read if you need to know more about that. Mr. Schultz has been featured on PBS's The News Hour, NPR's All Things Considered. He's also a revered teacher who founded and directs the renowned Writers' Studio in New York, which has been described as so prestigious, it's next to impossible to get into, so don't bother trying. But frankly, prizes, academic posts, and media appearances don't necessarily signify the best poets. Philip Schultz writes great poems. We're lucky that he comes to us tonight with a new book of poems called Luxury, his 8th poetry collection, which I don't hesitate to pronounce the best book of new poems I've ever had the privilege of reading. Let me tell you that what you won't find in the poems of Luxury are opulent metaphors or similes, nor alliteration, rhyme, and meter, nor any of the other stock-and-trade poetic trappings and settings, no walks in the woods, no flowers, no moonlight, no tears. What you will hear is poems that are built on stories. Mr. Schultz is a master storyteller. The lines of his verse use the language and syntax of thought. Indeed, Mr. Schultz is the poet of our interior lives, the poet of our thoughts when we think most deeply about life. These are lyrical poems marked by emotional directness and deep compassion, with an admixture of humor and irony. Indeed, some of them are wildly funny. His concerns are with humanity, the poignant suffering and brave celebrations of life. With humility and compassion, this poet guides us to places of insight and wisdom. Without presuming to preach or teach, his poems point the way toward the conduct of a good life. In any case, I think you'll find listening to Mr. Schultz's poems to be good health. So won't you please join me in welcoming Philip Schultz.
You ever get the feeling you should quit while you're ahead? Well, thank you, Christie. That is a magnificent introduction, one of the best ever. Thank you. And it's such a pleasure reading with Eleanor, a student that goes back many years when I think even before it was a school. And well, I was still teaching at NYU, yes. And the music tonight, God, you're all so lucky. Up until this moment, at least. Paraphernalia. I'm in my study worrying about essentials, like car keys and wallet with all its accoutrements, to prove my behavior is legal and matches my age. As I get older, more seems to be needed. My dog, Penelope, has her own leash, collar, and tags, plus toys and treats to meet the occasion. Even my car is one, I imagine, with all its gadgets to measure how much of itself is used up. Family, of course, of which I'm one, and carry everywhere in photos, arguments, and worries, especially when alone. And yes, the past, with all its trappings, resumes, expectations, and resentments, cluttering the view of the present, which I seem to have less to do with lately, standing as I do off somewhere nearby, confused as to what just occurred and why. Yes, I'm quickly aging, feeling all filled up with box scores in the ubiquitous world of politics and tragedy. Right now, for instance, my 16-year-old son is doing homework, listening to SportsCenter, while my wife is on the phone advising our older son on college classes, half listening to NPR relay the latest refugee calamity. And here I am, worrying about a future my sons will help make, while my soul waits patiently at the door, hoping I'll remember my sunglasses, car keys, and Penelope in my hurry to be obsolete. We live in East Hampton. We're part of the local world, not the summer world, and that means that doing things like parking can be a calamity, and the jitney is the bus. I go commute to New York. This is called Aardvarks. It's summer and the jitney is packed, every seat taken, except for the one 5 rows up in which a burly man has barricaded his window seat with a briefcase and jacket, an act meant to confront others with his superiority. Munching chips and guffawing at a YouTube video of an obese woman riding a scooter down a country road, towing a younger obese woman in a wheelchair, he reminds me of a neighbor's dog that would steal and bury our dog's bones, then growl defiantly on his side of our fence. Oh, you know him, you've seen him. Yeah. He's the reason I'm sitting back here next to the toilet, thinking about Pythagoras, who believed our souls ended up inside the bodies of animals selected as rewards and punishments. Well, the 3 giggling girls stretching their legs into the aisle every time the shy attendant passes, making him stutter apologies in a Slavic accent, orangutans, probably. Sequestered back here between work and family, thought and dreaming, I'm slowly evolving into, say, an aardvark, the last living representative of a nocturnal, burrowing species, hurling down the highway inside a bus whose shell is camouflaged as a vodka ad, on its way to a barricaded future on the far side of a fence where all our significance is buried. Now, your neighbors really here, you're on the other side of the sound. You can almost see me waving from, there's Shelter Island in between. But you all experienced Sandy. Okay, well, this is a Sandy poem. It's called IGA. It's 1 week after Sandy, and Mrs. Cobb, our mailman's aunt, who lived in the Halloween house on Sherrill Road that burned down, is ahead of me in line, hands in her hair, screaming. Betsy, the cashier, is telling the assistant manager, Peggy, that all she did was say her peaches aren't the ones on sale. Mr. Brim, the sourpuss who owns the pizzeria on North Main, yells from behind me, "Just give her the damn peaches. A dead deer's on my garage, my backyard's a lake, we're still at my sister-in-law's, and I'm not hollering my head off." I offer to pay, and Betsy snorts, "You?" Because 2 years ago, I refused to make a third donation to her choir, and her God isn't the forgiving kind. You know, I read this, I can't remember where, and someone came up to me and she said she worked for IGA and she would love to buy the poem just so that no one would see it. Now Rudy, the manager, is here, angry not to be among his friends, the chips and donuts in aisle 6. "Good," Mr. Brim groans, "now everyone's here." Actually, almost everyone is here. JJ, the deli air drummer who hums R&B and slices everything thin. Fergus, the cart gatherer whose tattoos depict angry biblical patriarchs. And Benny in produce, who lost 84 pounds eating sardines and Cocoa Puffs and has iPhone photos to prove it. All come to see if this is another catastrophe that will keep us up all night, watching our kids sleep in the living room, praying for the wind to stop, the roof to hold, that last insurance bill got paid, fearing our ignorance and pettiness is to blame. That if we were just a little more humble in the hearing and sublime in the doing, as St. Augustine suggested, we could all go back to sleep, only one donation and the right peach shy of deliverance. So what book do you want me to read from next week? Great audience. This is called At the Manhattan Social Security Office. And it begins with a quote from a wonderful Spanish philosopher, Miguel de Unamuno. "The mind seeks what is dead, for what is living escapes it." I'm practicing the Stoic art of insouciance, not because I prefer not thinking about what signing up for Medicare means, or why so many who came after me are being called first, but because downstairs my soul was examined for signs of violence and duplicity. You know, these metal detectors. Apparently, no, its fatigue and ambivalence weren't visible, apparently. In the next row, a man is telling a girl bobbing to an iPhone to sit still before the guard returns. When I was her age, signing up meant going to Vietnam, which meant practicing the Zen art of vanishing. At the windows, a blind man is asking why he didn't receive his disability payments in prison. He needs his sustenance. Behind me, another man is asking to see my paper. He's looking for work, he says. Happy to be free of Afghanistan, what could work, I hand him my New York Review of Books. Bismarck said explaining was a weakness. As her father explains the necessity of securing her future, the girl squirms. She fears only boredom. I feared everything. In 5 months, my father would die, and Mother and I would live on $200 a month his Social Security paid. At the windows, the blind man is practicing the existential art of groveling, exposing the stitches on his scalp to a clerk who's practicing the cynical art of indifference. The girl's soul, hovering near the ceiling, is enjoying its moments of radiance. My soul, fretfully pacing the water cooler, is practicing the fatalistic art of understanding that nothing can be done about Afghanistan, that in order to influence the future, we must kill it. And that refers back to the Unamuno quote. The Westerns. I mean, I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood in Rochester, inner city, in Rochester, New York, and we all lived for those Westerns Saturday morning. We didn't care about the cartoons. We wanted the Westerns. Once again, Randolph Scott is thinking out loud on TV about the end of freedom, God, mercy, why barbed wire fences no longer hold back old or new grudges, rabbit squatters, the wagon loads of grueling pilgrim faith in an ever westward expanding destiny. While once again I'm up late remembering the lacquered sunsets on the Paramount's patch screen Saturday mornings, me and 10 to 15 other hoodlum sons of immigrant dreamers aloft in the filthy froth of the balcony, surrounded by the ear-popping fall to your knees and say hallelujah serendipity of the swooning music. Westerns were what we wanted, couldn't get enough of. All those standoffs between post-war rectitude and existential greed, feeding our burgeoning hunger to be part of the great American rhapsody. Everyone mumbling, believing only in gullibility, technicolor, eradicating evil, owning everything. Is this why every 10 minutes the plot questioned everyone's manhood for no reason whatsoever? The town drank, the hero sought revenge from a flashback that had murdered his entire family in slow motion. Why everyone believed in the rewards of futility, the solace of violence, the dignity of misfortune, waited endlessly for the always late, just around the bend, steeped in appetite and irresistible grief, beaten to a pulp, utterly insulted point to arrive. Hoping it tie everything together, finally, maybe. Why all these peculiar curlicues are whirling through my sleepy brain? Because nothing and everything has changed, and my tiny moment is also quickly passing, while the end is taking me somewhere the beginning never wanted me to be. For some reason, this poem has become a favorite with high school kids in California, in Arizona. They do videos of reading it and commenting on it. I mean, I keep getting things like they identify with it in some way. It's called Greed. I should say I live on a street in East Hampton that when I got the house, it was a cottage and it was surrounded by other cottages, and now we had to add on as we had kids. But the cottages are mostly McMansions, and there's very little yards and big houses, and they're all empty most of the year. So in the winter, if you look out the window, you see no TVs, you see no lights. And this poem was also written after, during the Great Recession. My ocean town struggles to pick up leaves, offer summer school, and keep our library open. Every day now, more men stand at the railroad station waiting to be chosen for work. Because it's thought the Hispanics will work for less, they get picked first, while the whites and blacks avoid each other's eyes. Our handyman, Santos, who expects only what his hands earn, is proud of his half-acre in Guatemala, where he plans to retire. His desire to proceed with dignity is admirable. But he knows now no one retires. Everyone works harder. My father imagined a life more satisfying than the one he managed to lead. He didn't see himself as uneducated, thwarted, or bitter, but soon to be rich. Being rich was his right, he believed. Happiness, I used to think, was a necessary illusion. Now I think it's just precious moments of relief, like dreams of Guatemala. Sometimes at night in winter, surrounded by the significant silence of empty mansions, which once were cottages where people lived their lives and are now owned by banks and the absent rich, I like to stand at my window looking for a TV's futile flickering, always surprised to see, instead, the quaint, porous face of my reflection, immersed in darkness, its one abundance. This is a short poem. It's called How I Became a Teacher, and it's probably true. I have no way of knowing, but it just seemed so at the time. She sat there quietly across the kitchen table, playing solitaire, each sighing breath rising and falling, the green shine of her eyes turning opaque, each descent of her shoulders lowering me, her left shoe tapping a tune I never recognized. Not once did I interrupt, ask for something, the way Father always did. I sat across the snowy world, slowly mastering the art of disappearing into someone else. It's what you have to do, pretty much, when you have to, it's beyond compassion, it's identification. It's like a molecular exchange. The kiss. These are for two men friends of ours. In a sense, Jack and Manuel were starting over again. Jack, a Romanian Jew who designed our house, drank our kids' concoctions made out of everything on a restaurant's table, which we wouldn't do. And Manuel, who shared his amazement at a perplexing world while surviving Cuba, communism, and AIDS, got married at City Hall not long after two men could. To help them celebrate, Monica and I brought a fancy bottle of champagne we could never find a reason to open before. As is the custom, we kissed after my toast while they just looked at each other curiously. Never in public before, Jack said. Okay, I know what it feels like to see myself through the harsh light of another's eyes, to be the other. Suddenly, we were they and they us, if you know what I mean. I mean objectified. Relax, there's no point to be made. Even notarized, love is never normal or wise, and no one knows how to behave or hasn't felt despised. It doesn't matter that my toast was celebratory, that I'm saying now what I couldn't say then. What matters is they kissed finally, quite elegantly, and we all enjoyed the splendid dinner Jack made. My wife is a sculptor, and she makes cakes. This is one of them. They're deceptive. They're very festive looking, and then this is a pile of writhing bodies on top. The cakes are made out of porcelain. You can't eat them. It's only in the imagination. And believe it or not, my most successful book was called Failure, and these cakes are her most popular sculpture. Go figure. My wife makes porcelain sculptures of cakes, each the size of an actual cake, delicious monuments to every occasion, if edible only by the imagination. On each, an object, a bird, feathers, stones, teeth, or piles of tiny primeval people, struggling, it seems, either to be more defined or less conspicuous. One, a slice with a single tiny figure balancing itself awkwardly on top, mystified by its absolute aloneness, wondering what happened to all the others. Sometimes I watch her standing there, arms akimbo, staring at her theater of absurd desserts, crowding the table in the living room, thinking perhaps of the uncelebrated child hidden inside the wife and mother, inside the artist, each surprised, if not delighted, at what was made out of nothing but faith, that what lies hidden in each birthday and anniversary can be grasped, cherished, and eaten. She showed me one today. It's always dangerous to admire it because you never know if you're going to understand it. And anyway, there's a cake with a bunch of little figures, little male figures, stick figures that she's made on top of it, standing about, or walking about, standing about. And I said, I really like this one. She said, you should. They're all you. I have to say, none of these were very flattering. And she said, most of them, they're talking to themselves. You know, I have to say, I have a new electric car, and I don't understand it. I mean, it certainly doesn't understand me. We're not sure we like each other. And the other day I got in it, and I had a rough day, and I said, I'm not in a very good mood. And the car said, I'm sorry to hear. True. I must have hit some button. I didn't know it could talk. I sat there terrified. I didn't know if it was going to let me out. And then it said, the web is very expansive. Anything you ask, I'll try to answer. I don't know if I would recommend this, depending how strong your hearts are. I can't read a serious poem now, right? I mean, the Woman's March. So many mothers are here, daughters and granddaughters. Mine's been dead for 19 years, but somehow managed to come. I'm seeing her everywhere, in the pleased with itself smile of the little girl riding her father's shoulder, holding a sign announcing girl power in the beginning of the woman's century. In the don't mess with me look of the much-pierced young woman in black who appears to have finally found her cadence, in the excited gray-green eyes of the old woman in a wheelchair being pushed along at quite a clip by, I assume, her grandson who looks absolutely mesmerized. And just ahead is the forceful stride of the black drummer banging away for all she is and wants to be, using everything she has to make a point about strength and willfulness and sacrifice that maybe only women have the right to make, having made all of us, shared themselves so completely. A point about going too far and not far enough, about time and the pain it brings. And yes, here I am, older than I ever intended to be, enjoying the ringing in my ears, remembering being lifted into the air by my mother, trembling with joy as she enfolded me into the hospitable wings of her peasant apron. Yes, she's here, marching with all the others, all of whom understand what's being asked of them one more time. At the 9/11 memorial, I'm sure you've all seen it, or in New York. There are so few trees. Shade is necessary and merciful. The fierce staring and incurious silence, the long winding lines and frantic rubbings posing, the respectful attention and clear blue eye of the sky, This is a dour, elegant place where the essential and the excruciating are at an impossible impasse, where everything has already been said and nothing seems to have always existed. Okay, I'm going to read one more of the small ones, and then there's a long, I'm going to read sections from the long poem. This is called Googling Ourselves. If you've ever Googled yourself, you realize there's a lot of you. A lot of funerals, a lot of weddings, a lot of imprisonments. And it has a quote from Nietzsche. You think yourself wise, proud Zarathustra, then guess the riddle. Speak then, who am I? These strangers with my name, busy being kidnapped, embezzled, honored, and dying at a frightening rate. The cross-dressing exterminator convicted of rape in Kensington, Ohio, sentenced to 72 years without bail. The policeman killed stopping a burglary in Thermopolis, Wyoming. Could they have imagined a Florida painter with their name communicating with extraterrestrials through sculptures made out of railroad tracks? Or being written about in a poem by another member of their redundant family for a reason none of us can explain? Sometimes I feel I'm imaginary, don't really exist. Catch myself wondering why I only seem to like myself when, say, I'm wearing a teacher's face because I see myself only through others' eyes. In that case, who am I really? Alone at night watching a ball game, I'm always surprised when I speak to myself in third person, wondering why this man cares so much about something he plays no part in. It's easier to wonder why Nietzsche sought his soul's sympathy, a truth he knew he despised, probably feared he wouldn't survive. To imagine him up late seeking his ever-evolving, unidentifiable self, a past more inhabitable and less unforgiving. Anxious to know why someone with his name would say, poets lie too much. Who among us has not adulterated his wine? Late at night, the web is a dangerous swamp, a voyeuristic self-scrutiny and addictive impersonation. The ego testifying for and against itself, seeking evidence of triumph and complicity, sanctioned without malice, pretext, or God. Who is this man obsessively looking up all his persona narrators, feeling like a hodgepodge trapped somewhere between heaven and earth, spitting against the wind? Is it because he knows he's getting closer to the end, will soon vanish and become nothing? Is this why he's studying everyone who answers to his name? Because one may have invented time or sympathy or God and will love him, even momentarily, for who he is. I'm going to read a few sections from the title poem. I should preface this by saying that I was telling my wife something, and she said I should probably tell you all that it's a poem it's about a subject, suicide, that I could never deal with before. And I tried to, but I never really could deal with it. And I guess it's because I'm older now that I, one, am able, less afraid, and two, have the craft. When I was younger, I wouldn't have the craft to be able to withstand its gravity, among other things. Sometimes a hidden memory or thought flings my right arm forward, and I'll recoil as if struck by an invisible blow and cry out. It's over in a moment, but the cry, elemental, fearful, and contrite, lingers like a scent of decay. That's when all that has yet to happen is erased by what already has. Perched On the curb, like a big roily-poily golden bird, a new 1955 Pontiac station wagon, and Dad, triumphant, waving at Mom, Grandma, and me to come over and see its double-hooded headlights, big swerved tail fins, shiny Ottawa war chief hood ornament. As we, rotating clockwise, are astonished by the automatic transmission, cloth that shines brighter than leather, 8 powerful cylinders, white walls reflecting a splendor usually seen in suburban driveways, not deep inside Rochester, New York, in the inner city, where snow buries spring and memories of war still sour the air, where everybody hates the sound of their last name and insulin curbs belittle the reasonable trees. Winking, Dad slid me conspicuously behind the wheel, hollering, "How's that for luxury, kiddo?" R is a friend of mine, a very gifted young black poet that I met in graduate school, and he was given, the poem will explain it, but he killed himself. And I and others were always coming up with reasons for him to survive and try to go on living, and it was finally a futile argument. Saturday nights, I went to hear R spin infinite spools of biblical jazz prophecy out of a miserable bar piano in our college town, the kind that makes the floor weep and the ceiling grieve. R believed his pain was supreme, that he was king, being the son of a white mom and the black man she cheated on her white husband with. Given his slave papers and set adrift at 8 in foster homes because, she explained, he was too much of one thing and not enough of another. Thus, he became an orphan stillborn, obsessed with white women, the kind who came to hear him use his genius to hate himself and hate them. Up there, deep inside each sullen puff of a cigarette, his inner voice, up-tempo, dot-time scale riff coming from so far down, the only question left was how much longer pain would sustain him. He could live on nothing. This Christmas, a 70th birthday present, my wife and 2 sons took me to Finca La Viaga, Hemingway's house in San Francisco de Paula, Cuba, where I, among tourists from Canada, China, and Sweden, was utterly happy, peering through fragile windows at roped-off furniture, belligerent trophy heads, decaying books, and photos of matadors and movie actors, a ghostly royal portable typewriter, all the vexed memorabilia of death's foremost connoisseur. Yes, Hemingway, whose stories I read while Dad was dying, about fathers and sons, codes of honor and courage and gracious appetites, the kind of stories I wanted to write, with luminous sentences unafraid to embrace the simplicity of grief and disgrace. Hemingway, who, like my father and R, chose death, would show me how to live. This is part 2. It's a quote from Hemingway. He was too simple to wonder when he had attained humility. That's the Old Man in the Sea. If you haven't reread that or read it, treat yourself. It's a wonderful book. Sometimes a noise I can sense but not hear ricochets in a place in me I can't name. That's when the darkness accentuates all my feelings of guilt and shame, and I'm unable to distinguish between misery and nothingness. When all dignity vanishes and nothing is left to say or do, be curious about or desire. When my mother's voice pleads for me to remember everything I live for. Once in 1972, after not having spoken in months, Art called to say a big black bird perched on his shoulder every time he tried to write. questioning his every instinct and desire to make something out of nothing, even his right to console himself. Neither poetry nor music would save him, it said. He was only forestalling the inevitable, placating a grief that would eventually defeat him. I didn't know what to say, so I quoted Unamuno. Self-compassion widens into love of all that lives and therefore wants to survive. Each embryo was a phenomena, Unamuno said, of singular longing, a turning away from the dark coil of agony. Please, I pleaded, remember the first time his black foster mother placed his fingers on a keyboard, the astonishment he felt in each note, the joy of feeling original and alive. Music was his birthright, not pain. Please, I pleaded, assent to rhapsody, the angels of revelation. Shun this black bird of nothingness. Yes, he said, he understood, but he didn't call to be saved. He called to say goodbye. You know, this black bird or shitbird is the center of the school I started. I think only in writing this poem did I realize why I did start this school, something so completely impractical. And when writers identify that this dark negative voice, which we all have, is this other force to be argued with and not believed, they can sometimes find a way of writing, of being creative. Penelope and I, observing in the early morning ocean light a fiery orange orb at the far left side of the sky, while at the far right side, no bigger than my thumb, shy in profile, the ghostly spider moon dangling by a spidery filament. Suddenly, Penelope is barking at an old man stumbling out of the beach entrance, measuring with a cane each small step. Yes, miles from town, head tilted toward the waves, as if listening for instruction, the improbability of an old man with a cane, perhaps blind, sensing what we see, a buck, doe, and 3 yearlings stepping out of the dunes, all of us suddenly locked in a jittery vigilance, turning one toward the other, each, incredible as it seems, an industry of observation, a tiny, fragile pause, ingenious scrap of discernment, colliding for a moment before vanishing back into the bright, infinite vagueness from which we came. The Turtle Crossing Old Stone Highway this morning may not yet have arrived at its destination, should one exist. Perhaps one shouldn't interfere with the struggles of a species not his own. Sisyphus' dilemma was human, after all. Sympathy is ancient and often hopeless, an enterprise as instinct and desire. Out here in spring, a high frequency of wings, the dissonance of unbridled wind, the endless walking and running along winding roads and blind curves, the wild, uninhibited willfulness of anxious new life. Yesterday, a man riding his bike was killed when a deer hit by a pickup flew into him from across the road. Bad luck, Murphy's Law, or a logic so perverse as to be absurd? Perhaps they shared, this man and deer, a love of field of tall grass, cul-de-sacs and back roads leading nowhere, a belief in family, loyalty, and the common good, loved the dusk equally. Could in his last moments, parked on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, appreciate the strength of will that had taken him that far? Could he see himself as someone who had known joy, the wizardry and reconstituted bliss that lived in him deeper than the pain? Did he recall with pleasure the 17-year-old wunderkind who played pieces from Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in a scholarship competition in Tiger Stadium, his among 250 fingers reawakening Beethoven, the Beatles, Chopin, and Liszt as roaming judges listened to his intricately shifting overtones and hard cacophonous breaths amid the furious clapping? Yes, I like to think that at the very end he understood he was more than a blunt machine of misery. Two more sections. Osiris was our guide, our driver in Cuba. Osiris is driving us up the side of a mountain to an orchid farm in Sorora, saying, "This is the most magical place in this disappointed land." Indeed, a glittering garden of 20,000 orchid plants winding up and around respectful roots and ornamental ferns and trees, stubbornly alive butterflies, 80 species of birds, and the world's smallest frog. A sweetness overflowing the beautiful names our guide Hermosa sings: Panadelium, Acalia, Cinia, Vanda Blue, Brassia, Peggy Ruth, Philoppolis, Mystic, and Waterfall Pansy. And there, inside the labyrinth of hot light, 3 phosphorus spheres. Us, a man and wife and 2 fervent young men, a family like any other, relishing the capacity of such improbable blossoms, each a promise of splendor, another hour of fever, a voluptuous awakening, a refuge from the despair stowed in the mind. The last section. Now, from across the house, the booming voice of my 16-year-old son announces his belief in the law and right of succession, the beginning of his reign. Already too big for this house, it conspires with a future that is his alone. My wife, a sculptor, looks up from her porcelain cakes arrayed over the living room table, which, even with the dead birds and beetles and tiny people writhing on top, are festive enough. While I, standing in the kitchen, pondering questions about guilt, satisfaction, and lunch, remember leaning against the sycamore in our front yard 26 years ago, trying to imagine a family inside the house I just bought, a future prolific enough to contain squawking black birds, flying deer, and an ocean as mysterious and improbable, as fragrant and luxurious as happiness. Thank you.
Philip Schultz, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Philip. Thanks also to Nora Fox and JY. And to Eleanor. For those of you who would like to take Philip Schultz home tonight, we have his wonderful new book, Luxury, and his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Failure, which he'd be glad to sign for you. I urge you to buy Luxury if you buy no other book of poem this year. Don't forget the Arts Café will return in May with Ocean Vuong. Take care and good night. Thank you.